Alright, I am back with another political talk video. I had a lot of fun doing the first one, but I did not realize it had been 6 months since I did that first one, which was over the island territories becoming states. Yeah, long story short, I've been meaning to do more political talk videos on my YouTube channel. It's just, I work 2 part-time jobs, and I really don't get any days off unless I ask for them, so it's hard to find time to film one of these things because it requires a lot of research, and I try to make my arguments as strongly as possible. So, yeah, hopefully I'll get a few more of these throughout this year. It's April. I tried to do one of these back in February, but I just never got the chance to do it. But I'm here now. So I'm going to do another political talk video. And basically, this one is going to be about my arguments for term limits for Congress and the Supreme Court. Now, the reason why this one has kind of come up, because I've been thinking about this one for a while now. I mean, following, for example, 2 key ththings. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her primary against Joe Crowley in New York, and over the last couple of years, issues regarding Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's health and age, not just with me, but people all over the country do sometimes wonder, should there be term limits or not for all 3 branches of government? Because currently we do have term limits for the executive branch, for the president, and even some governorships. But why don't we do the same for the other branches of government as well? So basically that's the main point and question of this video. Should there be term limits for the legislative and judicial branches? And if so, well, for how long? Well, this is just going to be my opinions on it, and hopefully it's a satisfying answer for everyone out there who's curious. Oh, here we go. Okay, so similar to the first political talk video I did over the island territories becoming states, I'm going to give some historical context first, and then go about this in a few different parts before I get to my, conclusion. So, yeah, so this first part, let's just get over some historical context. Originally, when the nation was founded, the founding fathers had the 3 branches of government in the Constitution. The Congress, or the legislative branch, came first, then the executive, which was the president, and then the courts, the judicial branch, was third. And originally, very few presidents actively tried to run for a 3rd term, and instead followed the unofficial precedent set by President George Washington when he chose not to run for a 3rd term after he served his first 2 terms. And I'm going to bring this back up later, but the reason why I'm talking about the presidency now is because it's relevant to the arguments for why there should be term limits for the Congress and Supreme Court. Now, some presidents after Washington did try running for 3rd terms. Ulysses Grant tried running for a 3rd term. Grover Cleveland tried running for 3 terms. Teddy Roosevelt, I think, tried running for a 3rd term, but none of them got reelected. The only president who ever did get a 3rd term was FDR when he got reelected in 1940, and then he got elected for a 4th term in 1944, but he died only a few months into that 4th term. And it was during Truman's presidency, after he basically, as FDR served vice president, assumed the presidency after his death, and then after basically serving out that whole 4th term of Roosevelt, then getting elected to a term of his own, Congress finally decided to pass an amendment to restrict the amount of time a president can serve. So the 22nd Amendment was passed under President Truman. It was passed by the Congress on March 21st, 1947, and then ratified on February 27th, 1951. So, and this is a debatable point, but I still feel like it's a fair point to bring up. And this is something some people do like to bring up, as the whole reason why we have term limits. At the time, basically, Truman was essentially a 5th term as a Democratic president after FDR served 3 full terms. Truman served most of FDR's 4th term, like I said, and then he got elected to a full term of his own. At this point, there was a Republican Congress, so some people like to argue the Republicans at the time wanted to ensure that another popular Democrat couldn't serve more than 2 terms, so that's why they basically made an amendment so that way no president will ever serve more than 2 terms again. Now, at the same time, one can argue that, again, if this was a politically biased decision or not, since, again, it was a Republican Congress that voted for it, but to be fair, a lot of Democrats at the time also supported it. So, and at the same time, we've had popular presidents, both Republican and Democrat, who got 2 terms, and some may have been popular enough to get a third term, but because of the 22nd Amendment, none of them did, and I'll get back to this point in a minute. But my main point is simply this. Ultimately, the Congress finally decided to say that no president of the United States can ever serve more than 10 years again. 2 full elected terms and a half term. Should a vice president assume the presidency, say, with a year and a half left of his predecessor's term, then get elected to 2 full terms of his own, that'd be about 9.5 years. That would be basically the limit. And while we've had a few times since 1951 where that has happened, I believe Lyndon Johnson, he served about a 6-year, basically a 6-year term after filling in for Kennedy. Ford basically served like a 3-year term, filling in for Nixon. No president has ever actually served the full 10 years. But despite how much of this, I guess, effort to restrict the term length of a presidential term, it's never happened for Congress. So ultimately, why is it we have it for the president, the executive branch, but not term limits for the Congress or the Supreme Court? Well, let's look at the executive branch itself, and then maybe we can that will give us an idea for why I argue we should have term limits for the Congress and the Supreme Court. Okay, so now let's look specifically at the executive branch, which is the presidents on the federal level and then governors on state level. And I'm going to bring that up back later, but ever since 1951, no United States president has ever been able to run for a third term because of the 22nd Amendment. But now, some people argue, well, wouldn't most presidents decide not to run for a third term anyway? I mean, very few ever actually wanted to run for a third term. But in reality, even without the 22nd Amendment, I personally see it's very doubtful that any president since 1951 actually would have run for a third term. Yes, there were plenty of two-term presidents that went out more popular or favorable than unpopular or unfavorable, but I sincerely doubt any of them actually would have run for a third term. I mean, there's only a handful of two-term presidents who I argue, following Truman, actually probably would have. I mean, just real quick, Eisenhower was popular, but he was very old, so I doubt he would have. Johnson, I mean, he could have run for another full term of his own, but he in poor health and not very popular, so he decided not to. Nixon was unpopular, he had to resign. Ford lost to Carter. Carter lost to Reagan. Reagan, although he was very popular, I think he was starting to have some issues at the time with the Alzheimer's. It was starting to affect him, and he was trying to keep that secret in the last few years of his presidency. Plus, even then, he was also the oldest president. George H.W. Bush lost re-election than Clinton. Clinton, while becoming, at the end of his presidency, being more popular and unpopular, decided not to run again. I doubt he would have run again, I mean. George W. Bush was not very popular. And Obama, while fairly popular, he said he was glad he didn't have to run for a third term because he was getting tired of the job anyway. So, in reality, I don't think any president, even with without the 22nd Amendment, would have run for a third term. I think all of them either was just too old or too tired of the job. But this does raise a question. One could argue if a president is truly popular, good at their job in the future, such as like Franklin Roosevelt was, then why do they need term limits? I mean, if they're really, and this will come back later when I get to the Congress part of this video, if a president is truly good at their job, why should they be term limited? Well, here's the thing. The Founding Fathers didn't want a monarch or a dictator basically ruling the United States. Hence, that's part of the reason why the colonies broke away from the British after the Revolution. They didn't agree with the monarchy, and there were other reasons for it, but that was one of them. I mean, but basically breaking away from monarchy to create a new monarchy in the colonies would have been kind of hypocritical. But additionally, I think at the same time, the founders were also aware of how putting too much power in one person was a dangerous precedent. After all, if you actually read the Constitution, I mean, the Congress is in the Constitution in the first article before the president, which is in the second article, and that's like a couple of sentences. The Congress is multiple paragraphs. So they also wanted to make sure the president didn't have that much power anyway. And again, because George Washington, the first president, basically set this unofficial precedent that after 2 terms, I'm done, I don't want to keep doing this anymore. Almost every president since after him, before Roosevelt, agreed with that. So ultimately, yeah, even if a president is good at their job, I think for the most part, the job just physically and mentally drains them. Most of them don't want to do it for a third term anyway. But now let's go to the state level for governors. Currently, we have 36 states and 4 territories that have term limits for their governors. Now it's an overwhelming majority. Like that's 40 out of 56. My state of Texas, however, is an example of a state that doesn't. We have unlimited 4-year terms. So theoretically, a governor of Texas could run 4 or 5 times and be reelected if he's popular. But at the same time, I mean, most governors probably won't want to do this. I mean, my governor, current governor, is named Greg Abbott. Now, he's currently in his 2nd term, but he's fairly older than the average man, for lack of a better term, and he's in a wheelchair. So, could he run for a 3rd term in a few years if he wanted to? Probably, but maybe that would also be maybe his last term as well. Because I also think, even though I'm not the biggest Abbott supporter, I could see him, if in not 2020, but maybe 2024, trying to run for president. I could just see that happening. But nevertheless, my point is simply this. Even on the state level, most governors do have term limits. So, and now one could argue it's a states' right issue whether or not there should be term limits for governors. After all, we have it in the Constitution. Well, we've made it in the Constitution now, in the 22nd Amendment, that the president has to be term limited. But it's really up to the states whether or not their governor should be term limited. But here's my question. If we have it in the Constitution that the president has to be term limited, and already the majority of states have their governors be term limited, why not just make it so that every state's governor has some form of term limits? Now, we could debate how long those terms should last or how many term limits they could get. I mean, some states, a governor's term limit might be 4 years, or term might be 4 years, but some it could be less, like maybe 2 years, some could be 6 years. And in some cases, a governor might only get 2 terms, but in other states, he might only get 1 term. So again, that's the whole back and forth of a states' right issue, is how much power should the governor have. But ultimately, I want to end on this. Currently, the president has a 2-term limit, or a total of 10 years, if he inherits part of his first term from his predecessor. And I personally argue that every governor of every state should have a 3-term limit. Now, the term limits can vary, obviously, and there are some strange rules. Like, for example, in some states, some governors can't serve consecutive terms. But ultimately, I just feel 3 terms for states would be better than having no term limits for some states. And again, going back to the counter-argument, well, if a governor's popular and is doing a good job, why should he be term limited? I think it's just because we don't want, as a nation, too much power in a single figure. Hence why we put term limits on the presidency. But now, let's get into the bulk of this video, which is, should there be term limits for the Congress and the court? And if so, how long should that be? Okay, so now we talk about the legislative branch, or the U.S. Congress. The Congress in the United States is composed of 2 chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And these are the elected officials in our bicameral legislative system in the U.S. government. Now, the U.S. Senate is the upper chamber, which is composed of 100 members. Every state gets 2 senators, and so there's 100 total. And the Senate's job of the senator, is to approve treaties, confirm president's cabinet and foreign dignitaries, vote on Supreme Court justices and other district judges, conduct trials for impeachment, and a significant difference between the Senate and the House is that even though we have elections every 2 years, only 1/3 of the Senate is ever up for re-election every year. Meanwhile, the House is the lower chamber, which is composed of 435 members. The reason why it's that many is basically we have our total U.S. Congress at 535 members. So we have our 100 from the Senate and then the 435 from the House. Every state is guaranteed at least 1 member of the House, but the members of the House are proportioned based on a state's population. So I live in Texas. My state has 2 senators, just like every other state, but we also have 36 members of the House, or 38 total. Because we're the 2nd largest state, we have basically the 2nd most members of our in the Congress. Now, the House responsibilities and duties include passing bills that will go to the Senate, passing articles of impeachment, voting on the annual budget, and every single member of the House is up for re-election every 2 years. Now, currently, we are in the 116th Congress. The Democratic Party controls the House, but the Republicans control the Senate. And this is just some information, one, admittedly kind of dates this video, but it also is somewhat relevant to the information I gave way back at the introduction, and a few points I'm going to make later on for this part as well as for the arguments for the Supreme Court. Now, ultimately, going back to what I said at the beginning of the video, why should there be a limit for how long a president can serve, but not for members of Congress? Now, here's the thing. Going back to what I brought up with the historical context for this video, and as well as a little bit with the president's part, the Founding Fathers wanted the legislative branch of the U.S. government to be the more dominant of the three branches. Now, yes, they wanted separation of powers to ensure, and checks and balances, to ensure, that no one branch was more powerful than the other three, or the other two, combined, and hence why the Congress is Article 1 of the Constitution, and why the president, is the second article in the Constitution. And yet, the Congress doesn't get term limits. Now, going back to something I said earlier, when the country was founded, there were maybe 70 members of Congress from the 13 colonies, whereas now we have over almost 535 members of Congress from all 50 states. So, one could argue the actual power of an individual congressman has changed with time. Instead of having basically 1/70 of a vote, or a little over about 1.5% of the vote, a member of Congress now has, well, there's over 500, so you have less than half of 1% of a vote, or less than a quarter of 1% of a vote, So, really, why do we need to have term limits on a congressman if he has nowhere near as much power as the president does? That's a common argument I've heard a few times. Really, if a president is far more powerful as an individual than Congress, why term limit them? Well, plus, another thing to also bring up, congressmen go up for re-election every 2 years, whereas the president's just every 4 years. And plus, the way we do the census every 10 years, the number of congressmen from every state changes. The number is set at 535. That's always going to be the same until we either get more states or the Congress changes how many members we can have if they ratify the Constitution, or amend the Constitution, So, in my state of Texas, currently like I said, we have 2 senators and 36 House members. The 2 senators is never going to change, but it's predicted after the 2020 census we're going to gain possibly 3, maybe even 4 more members of Congress. So we're going to gain a few more members of Congress because of how much the population has changed over the last 10 years. But in some states, they will lose some of their members of Congress. They could go from, say, 7 to 6. That already, by redistricting the states, some congressmen are now going to be essentially term limited, or are going to have to be primaried to try and keep less seats. But here's the thing. James Madison warned in the Federalist Papers of his concern of individuals who are in power for too long, and suggested at the idea when the nation was founded that there should be term limits for members of Congress. But it was never implemented, and there have been a few other cases where this has also been brought up, and I'll get back to that in a minute. But I also want to bring this up. To run for the House, you need to be at least 25 years old, and to run for the Senate, you have to be at least 30 years old. So right after that, if you run for a seat in the House or Senate, you're younger, and you can serve for far longer than the president. President, you can't run until you're at least 35 years old. And I think part of that makes sense because you want someone who has maybe some experience, whether it be in Congress, the military, or some other profession, before they run for the highest office in the land. And as I said, there have been several times term limits have been proposed in the House or Senate over the years, but none have ever been passed. And I want to go and point this out right now. I'm a Democrat, but in January of this year, 2019, my Senator Ted Cruz was amongst a small group of Republicans who actually introduced a proposal to insert term limits. I believe, and I could be wrong on this, I should have written it down here. I think it was 2 terms for a senator and either 3 or 5 terms for a member of the House. It was one or the other. I can't remember which one it was. However, I personally feel this proposal's term limits are a bit too small, and I'll get back to why I think it should be longer in a little bit. And here's the thing. Polls that I could find show that term limits are actually popular amongst the American people. Like, term limiting the Congress is actually not as unpopular as some people either in the Congress or in the news media claim. The polls I saw, because I found a few polls on this that go back from the last few years, anywhere from about 2/3 to almost 90% of the American people agree that we should have some form of term limits on the Congress. And again, going back to what I said earlier, some of them even argue if we do it for the president and most governors, why not do it for the House and Senate? Now, my speculation as to one reason why term limits have never been successfully implemented is I don't think not enough members of Congress support the idea that they should limit how long they can serve and restrict their powers if they're term limited. Like, they're worried, wait, why should I put a limit into how long I'm going to be in Congress if I want to be here 30, 40 years and with all the benefits that comes with the job? Because congressmen get healthcare benefits, they're guaranteed salary even if the government's shut down. So, back when we had that 35-day long government shutdown a couple months ago, every member of Congress was guaranteed their pay no matter how long the government was shut down. But lower-level federal workers weren't. So, that's a perk to being in Congress. But again, I think it's also this idea, why should I restrict how long I can serve if I want to make this a career, not just be here for, say, 10 years and move on? And to be fair, slight counter-argument, I mean, I work 2 restaurant jobs right now. I would not want to be told, oh, you can only work at this job for 5 years and then we're going to fire you. So, yeah, I don't think anyone wants to really do that. Basically, when you go into the job, restrict how long you're going to work there. I mean, you hope to find something better, but you don't want to go in knowing you can only serve for a little amount of time. But here's the thing. I personally argue that term limits in Congress would actually motivate members to consider early retirement or even encourage challengers to come forward. So, for example, if, say, we had a set number of term limits for a member for the House of Representatives, and someone knew they only had 2 terms left, maybe they would think, well, I want to run for higher office, maybe senator or governor in my state. If I only have 2 terms left, and I think now is a good time to run, I should do it now. Or, vice versa, maybe you see someone who has served for almost 15, 20 years, and you're up and coming, you think, I think I have a good chance of beating my congressperson if I challenge them now, and I can make the argument they're almost going to be term limited anyway, maybe I should take the opportunity to run now. So, yeah, I think by, in a sense, having term limits, it actually, as James Madison said, would help put a check in ensuring no one serves too long and doesn't basically, for lack of a better term, become drunk on power. Because there is this sense of arrogance and the sense of entitlement once you're in Congress that I earned this seat, I don't want to give it up. It's my responsibility to do what I can for my district, whether it be raising money, passing laws, or just anything else. And again, there are a few counter-arguments for term limits. For example, how do we determine who's best for leadership positions if we basically make it so no one can serve for a long time? So, like an example, if we made it so no congressman could serve for more than 12 years, so 2 terms for the Senate and 6 terms for the House, how do we really determine who's the best leadership? Now, look, for example, Nancy Pelosi, the current Speaker of the House, has been in there, 20 years? A little bit over 20 years, probably? She's been in there for a long time. And some say, well, because she's been here so long, and she's from a very wealthy district, and she raises a lot of money for the party, that's why she deserves leadership. But here's the thing. I don't think we should base leadership in Congress on those things, but rather their policies and their voting record. Do they really represent the interests of not only the party, but the nation as a whole? And that leads to another thing. If someone's in Congress for a long time, one could argue it'd be easier to try to basically bribe them or have outside money interests and lobbyists basically focus on particular congressmen from certain districts that they know are safe, and then they just, over time, lose touch with the people. Another counter-argument is, wouldn't also really great politicians be term limited if we had to do this for all Congress, not just, like, say, one party or one section of the country or state, but if we had term limits for every member of Congress? Wouldn't we also have to say goodbye to some really good congressmen? And yes, that is true. And also, counter-argument as well, to add on to that, why not just trust the voters to keep electing good people all the time? I mean, if someone's really bad at their job, regardless of their party, wouldn't they just get voted out anyway or primaried anyway? Yes, but here's the thing. People live far longer now than they did when the country was founded. I mean, back in the late 1700s or late 1800s, you would be considered lucky to hit 65. Now, I mean, the average death age in the United States is 78, 79 years old. Plus, if this one politician's ideas are truly popular, then a younger politician could primary them, and if they feel like this congressman's been in too long, but I'm basically a younger version of them, trust me. Or vice versa, this one congressman's been in so long, but they've kind of lost touch. I'll still represent you like they once did, but they've lost touch. Vote for me. So, yeah, and like I said way back at the beginning, it's a bit hypocritical that we have enforced term limits on the president, but not the Congress. So, yeah, there's a lot of arguments for and against term limits for the House and Senate. But ultimately, this is what I personally feel. And while it is debatable if we were to enact term limits, how long could a member of Congress serve? This, for me, is what I personally feel. I feel there should be a 10-term limit on members of the House, which is a total of 20 years, and a 4-term limit for members of the Senate, which is a total of 24 years, since House terms are 2 years and Senate terms are 6 years. Now, some people out there might say, I agree with you on the idea of term limits, but don't you think it's a little bit too much? And I'm going to bring up what I think is just an example I feel kind of shows the absolute best case scenario if someone were to serve on how someone could serve for life, but still be term limited. If someone got elected to the House, and they were 30 years old when they got elected to their first term, served the max 10 years in the House, then decided to run for the Senate, and served the max 4 years in the Senate, they'd be 74 years old. So they'd basically be of age to retire if they wanted to after their final Senate term. Now, that's the best case scenario. Some people might be able to, if they're lucky, get elected in their early 20s, or mid-20s, excuse me. Alexander Ocasio-Cortez is, what, 27, 28 years old? So, theoretically, it is possible that someone could come in their late 20s, early 30s, serve the max 44 years, and then retire in their 70s. But that's very unlikely. And like I said back at the beginning, if someone knew they only had, say, 2 terms left in the House, or 1 term left in the Senate, maybe that would encourage them not to run again. I mean, look at Dianne Feinstein. I'll end with this. She's an example of someone who has served in the Senate, what, over 30 years now? But if there was a 4-term term in the Senate, she'd be gone. But of course, ultimately, this is just my personal opinion. I do think we should have term limits in the House and Senate, and I strongly believe in this. But now I'm going to get to something I'm admittedly a little bit more split on, and that is term limits for the Supreme Court and other judicial judges and district court judges throughout the country. Okay, so now the Judicial Branch, which is the Supreme Court of the United States. Going back to what I said about the Constitution and the articles, when the first article in the Constitution is about the Congress, second is about the President, and Article 3 in the Constitution is about the Supreme Court, which basically just says the Supreme Court's duties are to determine if a law voted on by the Congress and President are either constitutional or unconstitutional, which is basically referred to as the process of judicial review. Now, federal judges, including the Supreme Court, are appointed by the United States President and then voted on by the Senate, unless you're Merrick Garland. A little jab at Mitch McConnell there. Not a big fan of the guy, but just want to bring that up. Again, kind of dates this video. And here's the thing. Judges on the Supreme Court and judicial district courts serve until they either resign, are impeached, retire, or just die in office. And this is basically a lifetime appointment for the most part, because nowadays you have judges who can serve 25, 30, in some cases 40 years on the courts. And this is why it's becoming also more, I guess, not necessarily popular, but favored for people to say, maybe we should have term limits on the courts. So here's the thing. A little bit of historical context. Back when the Supreme Nation was founded, similar to how we had fewer members of the House then than we do now, the Supreme Court started, there were only 6 members. But currently there are 9. And 5 of them have been nominated and appointed by Republican presidents, and 4 by Democratic presidents. So the court is more right-wing leaning than left-wing leaning, excuse me. And, again, would have probably been different had Obama's last pick, Merrick Garland, got on the court. I'm not going to live that down. I think I mentioned that in another video I did a while back, but that's not the point of this video. And like I said, there are some growing calls for Supreme Court and the district justices to have term limits, but it's not by not as many people or seen as popular, but it has grown in recent years. And that goes back to something I referenced at the very beginning of this video, which was Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's, health has been kind of declining in recent years, and there is worry, will she even last to the end of the Trump presidency? Whether you like Trump or not, if she were to die, he could appoint a third justice to replace her as well. Now, here's the thing. As I said at the end with the part about the Congress, I am personally more split on term limits for the judicial branch than I am the legislative branch. Now, it's not to say I'm not 100% for, 100% against it. I just am more in the camp that would probably say no than camp that would easily just say yes, like I am for the Congress. Now, one last little bit that kind of is a little more political here. And part of this is a jab at Republicans, part of this is a jab at Democrats. Republican Party as a whole is really good at court packing the judicial branch at all levels. Not just the Supreme Court. I mean, Trump's already gotten 2 justices in. But I believe the study I saw that said somewhere between 1 in 6 and 1 in 5 in all justices on the court right now on state and more regional levels have been appointed by President Trump and the Republicans in the Senate, which goes back to what I said earlier about the Congress. Currently, the Republicans still control the Senate. So, basically, all you need is a simple majority. Any judge that Trump appoints, all you need is all the Republicans to agree, and that judge is essentially going to serve for life. But here's the thing. The Democratic Party, while they don't court pack as much as the Republican Party does, they're also a bit, I guess, there's a sense of either ignorance or arrogance when it comes to the Supreme Court's power. Yes, it's the highest court in the land, but by focusing mostly on the Supreme Court, they don't really focus on don't seem to realize the fact that only a small percentage of court cases reach the Supreme Court. So when Barack Obama left office, yes, there was that whole issue with Merrick Garland, but there were like, 100 lower-level court judges, judicial seats that were left vacant because he and the Democrats at the time didn't really focus on trying to appoint any. Now, yes, Mitch McConnell did try to uphold or basically block some of the judges that Obama did nominate, not just Garland. But even then, when the Democrats still had the Senate, Obama was kind of, and a few of the Democratic leadership in the Senate, didn't think, appoint all these seats now while we can. And here's the thing. This is also the other thing I wanted to say about why I'm somewhat split on the idea of justices. Yes, term limiting justices, excuse me. Yes, if, similar with the Congress, if they have term limits, they might think, oh, well, we don't have much time left, so maybe we should retire now or see if we can find work elsewhere. But here's the thing, and this is basically my main reason why I'm kind of split with the terming justices. Congress, members of Congress actively run for their job every 2 years, or every 6 years if you're a member of the Senate. But being nominated for a judicial seat, whether it be a Supreme Court or, like I said, a state or regional level court, it's a high honor. But you work in other jobs in other courts before you can be appointed to those positions. So it's not like you're actively running to try and become a Supreme Court justice. No, the president and maybe people who work for the president look at your voting record and your sentencing record, and then see you as a potential good choice for the court. Then you go in front of the Senate. They basically, I guess, it's like a job interview, and they determine who's right for the job and who's not. So it's not really up to the American people to pick the Supreme Court justice. Now, yeah, or even other district judges. Now, sure, there are judge seats that people vote on local levels. Like, I have my local judges that I could vote for every 2 years in my elections. But ultimately, to me, it's kind of hard to make the argument that judges should be term limited when they're not the ones actually running for their jobs. They're appointed to their jobs by the first 2 branches of government. Now, that said, similar with the whole argument of the Congress, if we did have justices who were bad at their jobs, or, on the other hand, really good at their jobs, then if people did have a say in their judges on local levels, then, yeah, if they were really good, they'd keep getting reappointed. If they were really bad, they'd be removed from office, regardless of the level it was. So, there are cases of Supreme Court justices and district-level judges being fired or being impeached for wrongdoing. Similar to how members of Congress who are bad at their job can basically resign or basically be primaried and then get out of the office. And again, shouldn't the best judges who interpret laws and pass sentencing be trusted with determining the laws if they're constitutional or not? And this is where one of my, I guess, strongest arguments or reasons for to have limits on a Supreme Court justice or a district judge's term is relevant. They do have to interpret the laws, but laws change over time. Like, many laws we have now weren't the same laws we had just 20, 30 years ago when my parents were my age. And, similar with this whole idea I said back with the Congress, if you've been in for power for so long, there's almost a sense of entitlement or arrogance or ignorance to the world around you because you've been in power and you haven't actually tried to run for the job in a while. Because, again, judges don't have to run for the job often like members of the House and Senate do. So they may lose touch with how the laws impact society today. I mean, look at marijuana laws. I mean, what is it now? A little over half of all states have legalized marijuana. Sadly, it's not fully legalized in Texas yet. But there are a few states around us where even just 10 years ago, marijuana wasn't legalized, but now it is. Or another example, gay marriage. I mean, under Obama, the Supreme Court decided, the LGBT community has a right to legally marry nationwide, not just by some states. Now, again, we can go back and forth on the whole issue of states' rights with this. But ultimately, the Supreme Court determined, that gay marriage should be legal. Marijuana, at least on some states, at least for the judges that determine it on state level, should not be criminalized. And even some states have decriminalized it and helped pardon people who were in jail for marijuana. So again, there are some judges who are really good at their job, but they would be term limited and have to basically be removed from office. But by having term limits on judges, we get new, younger, fresh-faced judges who understand how the laws have impacted them that maybe those judges, the first ones, put into place. It's like if a judge came in the 70s, maybe implemented some laws, and then finally in the early 2000s decided to retire. Well, someone who grew up when that first judge was on the court, grew up with those laws, and now has a different understanding of the laws. So yeah, laws change with time, and our understanding of if the laws actually make sense or not also changes with time. So yeah, overall, like I said, I'm more split on whether or not we should have term limits for judges and the Supreme Court. And admittedly, this one may be more debatable, but this is where I personally would argue. If we were going to have term limits for judges, I would argue all lower-level judicial district courts where they're not, I guess, elected, like they're appointed by the president and the Senate, or maybe even by governors in some cases, there should be, at the absolute most, a 30-year limit. And the reason why I say this is because since they're not actively running to get reelected all the time, now yes, there are some judges who are, but not all of them, they need to have plenty of years on the court to show they have, like, what their voting record is, or sentencing record is, how they interpret the law. And so that way, whenever they decide, if they're lucky enough to be appointed, or nominated, for the Supreme Court, and whenever the Senate Judicial Committee, I believe that's the one, interrogates them, has this whole interview process, the days of hearings, they can actually look at decades of record. Because you wouldn't want to say a judge who's only been on for 10 years, then being appointed, and then you don't really know too much about them for every single possible case they've looked at. But then what about the Supreme Court? Similar to how I believe we should have around 20-24 years for the House and Senate, I feel the same way with the Supreme Court. I feel there should be, at the absolute most, 24-year term limit for a member of the Supreme Court. So let's just say if a justice gets on at the age of 50, similar to the whole, how I brought up with the example of just a random congressperson elected at 30, say they came in at 50, they'd basically be able to retire at 74. And then going back to something I said earlier, if a justice knew I only have 3 or 4 years left, and I like the president, he's the same party as the president who appointed me, maybe I'll retire so that way they can appoint me, or someone similar to me, or maybe someone younger who kind of agrees with me to be in my position, or vice versa. If they think, oh, well, I'm not feeling well physically, I don't really care who they nominate to replace me, I just think I only have a couple years left anyway, now's the time to retire, because I think just being on the court for so long, over 20 years, is starting to affect my health. So yeah, that's what I would argue. For all lower-level district courts that are basically appointed by the executive and legislative branches, 30-year limit. And for the Supreme Court, 24-year limit. Okay, and that is the end of this political talk video. Admittedly, a little bit longer than the first one, but that was my first one, so I didn't really know how I was going to go about doing it. But a lot more prepared this time, did a lot more research, and I had a lot more to say than I thought I did going into this one. So, yeah, these are my reasons for and the links of legislative and judicial term limits in the United States government. So, ultimately, like I said, I do strongly believe there should be term limits on legislative branch, but I am still admittedly a little split for the judicial branch. But, like I said, ultimately, this is what I believe. Legislative branch, for the House of Representatives, there should be 10 two-year terms or a 20-year term limit. For the U.S. Senate, there should be 4 6-year terms or 24-year limits. For the judicial branch, while I'm admittedly more split, this is just how I feel at the time, there should be a 30-year limit for lower-level judicial courts and a 24-year limit for the Supreme Court. So that's where I'm going to end this video. If you stuck through, watch the whole thing, thank you very much. I appreciate your viewership. Like this video, share this video, comment below. Maybe I'll try and get back to you at some point. And please subscribe. And hopefully I'll get back to more of these in the future. Like I said, I have a few of these planned out I want to do over the next few months. It's just, when will I get the time? I was fortunate I got the day off today. So hopefully if I get another day off in the future, I can devote time to make another one of these. And hopefully I'll have few other videos, reviews, and stuff coming up within the next few weeks. So keep an eye out for that. So yeah, not much else to say. Thank you very much for watching, and have a good day. Take care, everybody.